I never imagined the woman I loved would humiliate me in front of hundreds of people. But that's exactly what Janet did at our college farewell party. She stood on stage, microphone in hand, and when I walked up carrying flowers and a ring, she laughed, not nervously, but cruelly, mockingly, a sound that echoed through the entire hall. She announced that I'd been delusional to think someone like me could ever be with her. The crowd erupted in laughter and whispers. I stood frozen, hands trembling, holding roses that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Her friends filmed everything on their phones, and within hours the video had spread everywhere. Classmates I barely knew shared it, adding mocking captions and laughing emojis. I became the university's running joke overnight. The pathetic guy publicly destroyed by the girl he loved. That night, alone in my dorm, I stared at the ring I'd spent months saving for. Nothing extravagant, just simple silver, but it represented everything I felt for her. I thought back on every assignment I'd helped with, every late-night walk home, every coffee brought during exam season, convincing myself she'd cared. Even a little. I was wrong. The next morning, I made a decision. I would vanish from her world entirely. No explanations, no goodbyes, no second chances. I deleted her number, blocked her everywhere, avoided every place I knew she'd be. If she wanted me gone, I'd disappear so completely it would be as if I'd never existed. My name is Jimmy, and before that humiliating night, I was just an ordinary student trying to build something of myself. I came from a solidly middle-class family. My father worked at a manufacturing plant, my mother taught school, and both instilled in me a deep respect for hard work and honesty. I wasn't the most popular guy on campus or the richest or the most handsome, but I was dependable and genuinely cared about people. That's probably exactly why I fell so hard for Janet. She was everything I wasn't: confident, magnetic, always surrounded by friends and admirers, the kind of person whose laugh could light up a room. She came from serious wealth, the type of family that vacationed across Europe and drove luxury cars, yet she never seemed arrogant about it, at least not at first. We met during our second year, paired together for a group project in business management class. I remember our first real conversation clearly, a quiet evening in the library after everyone else had left, her struggling through a financial analysis section, me offering to help. She looked genuinely surprised, like she wasn't used to people helping without expecting something back. We spent 3 hours together that night working through spreadsheets, and when we finally finished, she thanked me in a way that made my heart skip. That was the beginning. We started talking more after that, library chats, cafeteria conversations about classes and dreams. I learned that despite her privilege, she felt crushing pressure from her family to be perfect. A father who expected her to eventually run the family company, a mother obsessed with status and appearances. She told me she sometimes felt like she was living someone else's life entirely. I listened, really listened, and I think that mattered to her. I fell for her slowly, then completely. I started doing small things: her favorite coffee, help prepping presentations, walking her home late at night. Never asked for, just offered, because that's what I thought caring for someone looked like. My friends teased me, warned me a girl like Janet would never seriously date someone like me. I brushed it off, naively believing that genuine care would outweigh money and status. As months passed, I convinced myself she felt the same. Texting when upset, calling for advice, laughing at my unfunny jokes, moments where I swore I caught something more lingering in her eyes. So I decided to take the risk. Our college farewell was approaching, a formal event marking the end of our time together, and I thought it would be the perfect moment. I saved every spare dollar from my part-time bookstore job, skipped meals, cut every unnecessary expense, and bought a simple silver ring. Nothing extravagant, but bought with honest money. I planned to wait until the evening was in full swing, walk up with flowers, and ask her to be my girlfriend in front of everyone, believing it would become a moment she'd remember forever. My roommate warned me to talk to her privately first, to feel things out, but I was confident. I believed in what we had. I believed in her. The night arrived, the venue beautifully decorated, lights strung everywhere, everyone dressed in their best. I wore a borrowed suit, carried a bouquet of red roses, and searched the crowd for her, my heart pounding. When I finally spotted her, stunning in a deep blue dress, laughing with Clara and her circle of friends, I gathered every ounce of courage and walked toward her. People noticed immediately, whispers spreading, someone turning down the music. By the time I reached her, half the room was watching. I held out the flowers, hands shaking slightly, said her name. For a split second, something flashed across her face. Surprise, panic, I couldn't tell. Then she smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was cold, almost pitying. Before I could finish speaking, she laughed, a sound that cut through me like a blade. She grabbed a nearby microphone and, in front of everyone, announced I was sweet but completely delusional, that we were just friends, that she'd never give me any reason to think otherwise, that someone like me should know my place. The room went silent, then erupted in laughter. Phones came out everywhere. I stood frozen, flowers hanging limply, one to disappear into floor. I searched her eyes one last time for any hint of regret. There was nothing, just cold indifference. I turned and walked out, leaving the flowers behind on the floor. The days that followed were the worst of my life. I stopped attending classes, unable to face the stares and whispers that followed me everywhere. The humiliation videos spread across every platform. Strangers commenting, sharing, turning my pain into memes. Some comments called me pathetic and desperate. Others were pitying, which somehow felt worse. My roommate tried comforting me, but there was nothing to say. I'd been humiliated in the worst possible way, and everyone knew it. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment endlessly. Had I missed obvious signs? Had she ever cared at all? Or was I simply convenient? Someone useful when she needed help? The worst part wasn't the public rejection itself. It was realizing the person I thought I knew, the person I'd spent months caring for, simply didn't exist. The Janet I loved was a fantasy I constructed. The real Janet could humiliate another human being without a second thought. After 3 days hiding away, I forced myself up, barely recognizing the defeated person staring back from a mirror. I hated feeling that weak, hated that I'd given someone that much power over me. That's when I made my real decision. I would not let this define me. I would not spend my life as a guy who got publicly rejected. I would disappear from her world entirely and rebuild myself into someone she could never touch again. I cut off every connection, blocked her everywhere, deleted every conversation, every photo, avoided every place I knew she'd be. To everyone else it looked like running away. It wasn't. I was removing her like a surgeon removing a tumor. Then I focused entirely on myself with intensity I'd never known. I buried myself in studies, aced every exam, finished assignments weeks early. I picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, saved every penny. I started working out, something I'd never bothered with before, waking at 5 each morning for runs and gym sessions. The physical pain a welcome distraction from the emotional kind. Slowly, everything shifted. My grades, always decent, became exceptional. Professors began recommending me for internships and research opportunities. My body built muscle and definition. People who used to ignore me started saying hello. I didn't care about their attention. I wasn't doing this for them. What I didn't realize was how much my disappearance was affecting Janet. At first, she barely noticed, too absorbed in her social life. But as weeks passed, people started talking, noticing my absence, questioning why she'd been so cruel to begin with. She brushed it off initially, insisting I get over it. But doubt crept in gradually. She started remembering the coffee I brought unasked, the late nights helping with projects, the way I always listened, things she'd taken entirely for granted, now conspicuously gone. Then, during a career seminar, a guest speaker mentioned my name. I'd been selected for a prestigious internship few students from our university ever achieved. People started talking about me again, differently this time, impressed, not mocking. Janet heard about it secondhand from Clara and felt an unfamiliar twist in her chest. Regret, pride, jealousy. She couldn't quite name it. She checked my social media, found herself blocked, started asking mutual friends about me under the guise of casual curiosity, though people noticed her sudden interest. One evening, she spotted me across campus, laughing with a group of friends, looking confident and genuinely happy, never once glancing her way. For the first time, she realized exactly what she'd lost. Not the version of me that used to trail after her, but the person I was becoming, someone she now had no way of reaching. She tried convincing herself it didn't matter, that she had plenty of friends and attention. But alone at night, she kept thinking about me, questioning her own actions, wondering if she'd made an irreversible mistake. Her mother noticed her distraction. Janet brushed her off, though the question lingered unanswered. She had everything she thought she wanted. So why did something feel so clearly missing? Meanwhile, I continued building my new life, making friends who respected who I was becoming, dating briefly just to remind myself I was worthy of affection, though I never forgot what Janet had done, how small she'd made me feel. Deep down, I wondered if she ever thought of me at all. I'd soon discover she thought about me far more than I could have imagined, and that discovery would change everything. The hardest part of moving on wasn't the anger. It was the quiet moments my mind would drift back to her despite everything I did to prevent it. Mid-study, a memory would surface unbidden. Her laugh at my dumb jokes, the way she tucked hair behind her ear while concentrating, the warmth in her voice during late-night calls when she couldn't sleep. These memories felt like ghosts, haunting me with something that never really existed. Some nights I lay awake wondering what I'd done wrong. Had I been too eager, too available? Had I misread every kind gesture? Or was she simply cruel? Someone who enjoyed the attention without ever intending to reciprocate? I hated that I still thought about her. Hated that some small part of me still cared. But I refused to reach out, refused to give her the satisfaction of knowing she still affected me. My pride wouldn't allow it. Months passed, and I started hearing things through mutual acquaintances. Janet asking about me in casual, roundabout ways that people noticed, bringing up my name in conversation, mentioning our old closeness. Some found it strange. Others assumed guilt. My friend Marcus, who ran in her social circle, pulled me aside one day and told me something that chilled me. She'd been acting differently lately, withdrawn from the party scene she once loved, her friends genuinely worried, constantly asking about me. He told me plainly she was clearly affected by my absence, that she hadn't expected me to actually disappear. I laughed bitterly, told him good, let her feel a fraction of what she'd put me through. Marcus shook his head, clarifying he wasn't asking me to forgive her, just to know that whatever I was doing, it was working. She was unraveling the fact that I genuinely moved on. That conversation planted something in my mind. For the first time, I realized my disappearance had become more than self-protection. It had become a silent form of revenge. By cutting her out entirely, refusing to acknowledge her existence, I'd hurt her in ways public confrontation never could. I'd shown her she no longer mattered to me, and for someone used to be in the center of attention, that was unbearable. But knowing that didn't make things simpler. If anything, it complicated everything. Because despite my anger, some part of me still remembered the girl I'd fallen for, the one who'd stayed up late sharing her dreams, who'd cried on my shoulder over her parents fighting. That girl had felt real, even if she'd turned out to be an illusion. I started noticing her around campus more. The library where I studied every afternoon, the coffee shop before morning classes, the gym during my usual workout hours. At first I assumed coincidence, but eventually realized she was deliberately positioning herself in my path, never approaching directly, just watching. It unsettled me. I kept my headphones on, eyes forward, refused any interaction, but I could feel her gaze and it made my skin crawl. One evening, leaving the library, I found a note tucked into my backpack, written on Janet's unmistakable expensive stationery. It read that she knew I didn't want to talk to her and understood why, but needed me to know she was sorry, that she made a terrible mistake she regretted every single day since, and asked for a chance to explain. I stared at that note for a long time. Part of me wanted to crumple it immediately. Another part, the part still holding on to old feelings, hesitated. What if she really was sorry? What if there was more to that night than I understood? Then I remembered the laughter, the cruel smile, how small she made me feel, and threw the note away. The next day came text from an unknown number, then another, relentless, all asking for a chance to explain, insisting there were reasons behind what she'd done. I blocked every single one without responding. If she thought I'd break, she was wrong. I'd spent too long rebuilding myself to let her tear it back down. But her persistence wore on me regardless. Not because I was tempted to respond, but because it reminded me this wasn't truly over. My friends noticed my growing irritability and withdrawal as I threw myself deeper into work and study, trying to drown out the mental noise. Then one night, Clara showed up at my dorm, arms crossed, both angry and concerned, insisting we needed to talk. She pushed past me into my room and demanded to know what I was doing to Janet, that she was falling apart, barely eating, barely sleeping, failing her classes, all because of me. I felt a surge of anger, pointing out I wasn't the one who'd humiliated someone in front of hundreds of people. Clara sighed, acknowledging what Janet had done was wrong, but asked if I had any idea why she'd actually done it. Her parents, she explained, had discovered my plan to confess that night. Someone, likely one of Janet's so-called friends, had tipped them off. Janet's father had threatened to cut her off entirely if she didn't publicly reject me, wanted me humiliated so thoroughly I'd never come near her again. She tried finding me before the party to warn me not to go through with it, but I was already on stage by the time she could reach me, her father watching her every move. Terrified of losing everything, she'd done what he demanded. My heart stopped hearing this. I asked if that was supposed to make me feel better, pointing out she'd still chosen to destroy me to save herself. Clara admitted she wasn't asking for forgiveness, just telling me the truth, that Janet had made a terrible choice she knew was wrong, and was paying for it now, and that whether I cared or not, she'd never stop thinking about me. After Clara left, I sat alone, mind racing. If true, everything I thought I understood was wrong. Janet hadn't rejected me from indifference, but from entrapment. Did that change anything, though? She'd still chosen her own comfort over my dignity, still let me be humiliated, still never explained until now, long after I'd already moved on. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, confusion, sadness, all tangled together. One thing was clear. Janet was breaking, and my absence was the cause. I had to decide whether that was enough, or whether I wanted something more. 3 days after Clara's visit, I was crossing campus when I heard Ray's voices from the parking lot. I recognized Janet's voice immediately and moved closer, staying hidden in shadow. She stood beside an expensive car facing a tall man in a business suit. Clearly her father, rigid posture, cold, commanding expression, Janet looking small and defensive in comparison. His voice was harsh, accusing her of obsessing over that boy, embarrassing herself and the family. Janet's voice, quieter but desperate, insisted she'd made a mistake, hurt someone who cared about her, and needed to make it right. Her father laughed coldly, dismissing the idea that apologizing to a nobody would fix anything, reminding her of her responsibilities and reputation, insisting I was never good enough for her and never would be. Hearing him talk about me that way brought back all the buried anger, but I stayed hidden, listening. Janet's voice grew defiant, insisting he didn't get to decide who deserved her, that I'd been kind and genuine, treated her better than anyone ever had, and that she destroyed that because she'd been too afraid to stand up to him. Her father's expression darkened further, accusing her of rebellion, threatening to cut her off completely. No money, no support, no family, if she didn't stop this nonsense. Janet stepped back, tears streaming, telling him to do it, that she didn't care anymore, that she'd rather have nothing than keep pretending to be someone she wasn't. Her father stared in apparent shock before pulling out a checkbook, scribbling something, and throwing a torn check at her feet, the last money she'd ever see from him. He said coldly, hoping her integrity kept her warm at night. He drove off, leaving her alone, crumpling to the ground, sobbing. I stood frozen. Part of me wanted to walk away and let her face the consequences alone. But another part, the part that remembered who I used to be, couldn't quite manage it. Before I could decide, someone else appeared. Michael, one of the wealthiest, most reputation-obsessed students on campus, known for getting whatever he wanted, crouched beside her, asking softly if she was okay, offering to take her somewhere quiet. She let him lead her to his car and drive away. Something about the scene didn't sit right. Michael had never shown genuine interest in helping anyone before. Over the following days, I noticed them together constantly, him walking her class, buying her lunch, people speculating she'd finally moved on. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit, though I told myself it wasn't my concern. Then Marcus approached with troubling information. Michael had been bragging that he planned to make Janet fall for him, while she was vulnerable, had made a bet with friends about how long it would take, planning to use and publicly dump her afterward for entertainment, just as she'd done to me. I felt cold fury hearing this. Marcus explained he was telling me because, despite everything, he knew I still cared, and she didn't deserve what Michael was planning. Nobody did. I wanted to deny caring, but the truth was, even after everything, I didn't want to see her hurt that way. Warning her, though, meant breaking my silence, meant admitting she still mattered to me. I wasn't sure I was ready. That night, I lay awake, deciding whether to stay silent and let karma run its course, or intervene and risk reopening barely healed wounds. By morning, I still hadn't decided, until I saw her sitting alone on a bench, staring sadly at her phone, Michael nowhere in sight, looking lost and broken, nothing like the confident girl I'd once known. In that moment, I realized this had stopped being about revenge. It had become about the kind of person I wanted to be. I walked over, heart pounding. She looked up, shocked, whispering my name. I told her we needed to talk and sat down, keeping distance between us. Clarify I hadn't come to reconcile, only to warn her about Michael, that he wasn't who she thought. She frowned, confused, insisting he'd been nothing but kind. I explained that was exactly what he wanted her to believe, that he'd made a bet with friends about making her fall for him before dumping her publicly for laughs. Color drained from her face as she called me a liar, demanding to know why he'd do such a thing. I told her bluntly he was a narcissist who saw people as toys, and she was currently vulnerable. He knew that and was exploiting it. She shook her head, tearful, asking why she should believe me after months of being ignored and blocked, accusing me of possibly wanting revenge. I admitted honestly I'd thought about revenge before, imagined her feeling even a fraction of my pain. But this wasn't that. I didn't want to watch her get used and discarded by someone like Michael. Despite everything, she didn't deserve it. A tear rolled down her cheek as she asked why I even cared after everything she'd done. I admitted I didn't fully know myself. Maybe because I was foolish enough to still remember who she used to be, or because I refused to become someone who watched another person get hurt when I could prevent it. She asked quietly if Clara had told me about her father, about her real reasons. I confirmed she had. Janet let out a shaky breath, acknowledging it didn't excuse what she'd done, that she should have refused him. But she'd been terrified, controlled her entire life by parents dictating who she should be. That night, discovering my plan to confess, her father had threatened Soulmate unless she humiliated me publicly, wanting to guarantee I'd never come near her again. I asked coldly if that meant she'd chosen her comfort over my dignity. She flinched, admitting she knew, that she hated herself for it daily, that she tried finding me before the party to stop it, but I was already on stage, her father watching. She'd panicked and done the worst possible thing, destroy me to save herself, something she'd never forgive herself for. I felt something tighten in my chest hearing this. It didn't erase the hurt, but it helped me understand. I told her quietly that the worst part hadn't been the humiliation itself, but realizing the person I loved, the person I thought I knew, never truly existed. I'd built her up as someone kind and caring, and in one moment she'd shattered that entirely. She broke down sobbing, apologizing repeatedly. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but what she'd done had nearly broken me, and no apology could undo that. After a few minutes, she wiped her eyes and asked what she should do about Michael, if what I'd said was true. I suggested she needed proof. Confront him carefully, record the conversation, get him to admit it outright. She asked if I'd help. I hesitated. Admitting being around her was complicated. She pleaded that she had no one else left. Her father had disowned her. Her friends had abandoned her. And if Michael was lying too, she was entirely alone. Her words hit harder than expected. I knew what isolation felt like, and wouldn't wish it on anyone, not even her. I agreed, but made clear that after this, we were finished, helping her with this one thing, then going our separate ways. She agreed, relief flooding her face. We devised a plan. Janet would invite Michael to a private library study room I knew had good acoustics, wearing a small borrowed recording device while I listened nearby through an earpiece, ready to intervene if needed. Michael arrived all smiles and charm, playing the caring friend perfectly, though I could hear the insincerity in his voice. Janet steered the conversation casually toward relationships, asking why he was really helping her, since they'd never been particularly close before. He claimed he'd always thought she was special, just never had the chance to know her properly. It sounded rehearsed, and Janet's next question sharpened accordingly, asking if he saw her as some kind of project or game. He laughed, forced, denying it, until Janet pressed further, revealing she'd heard about the bet, that he was only helping to see how long it took to make her fall for him before dumping her. Long, tense silence followed before his voice shifted entirely, losing all warmth, demanding to know who told her. She held firm, asking if it was true. He laughed cruelly, confirming it, calling her pathetic, admitting it had been almost too easy given how desperate she'd been for someone to care about her, that she'd practically thrown herself at him. I felt fury surge through me, wanted to burst in, but forced myself to let her handle it. She demanded to know how he could do that to someone. He scoffed, pointing out she'd done exactly the same thing to that loser Jimmy. Use him, let him on, crushed him publicly. He was just giving her a taste of her own medicine. Janet insisted it was different, that she'd had reasons. He laughed again, calling her a coward who did whatever her father demanded. At least he owned what he did, unlike her hypocrisy. I heard her stand abruptly, demanding he leave and stay away from her. His voice turned mocking, claiming he was done with her anyway, that she hadn't even been that fun, wishing her luck finding anyone willing to deal with her mess. Footsteps, a slammed door, silence. I walked into the study room to find her sitting against the wall, tears streaming. But this time her expression held something different, anger, determination. I asked if she'd gotten it all. She nodded, holding up the recorder. I told her now she knew exactly who he really was. She thanked me for warning her, for helping, acknowledging I hadn't needed to but had anyway. I agreed. We were even now. She asked what to do next. I told her to expose him, make sure everyone knew the truth, then move forward with her life. And us? She asked quietly. I looked down at her and told her there was no us. There never really had been. But I hoped she'd find her way to becoming the person she actually wanted to be, not the one her father had tried to shape. And with that, I walked away again. The recording went viral the next day. Janet didn't just share it quietly. She posted it everywhere, social media, campus forums, even sent it to university administration. Within hours, everyone knew what Michael had done. The backlash was swift and brutal. People who'd once admired him turned instantly, calling him manipulative, predatory. His friends who made the bet were exposed too. Screenshots of their group chat leaked. Reputations destroyed overnight. The university launched a formal investigation. Michael faced the disciplinary board. His father, a major donor, tried intervening, but the evidence was overwhelming. Michael was suspended for a semester, scholarships revoked, internship offers pulled. His carefully constructed future crumbled within days. But Janet wasn't finished. She came forward publicly with her own story, explaining what happened the night I proposed, taking full responsibility for the pain she'd caused, providing context about her family's pressure without using it as an excuse. Reactions were mixed. Some sympathized, understanding her impossible position. Others remained unforgiving, arguing her reasons didn't justify the cruelty. But she was no longer hiding, no longer letting others control her story. I stayed entirely out of the drama, refusing to comment or engage. I'd said what needed saying. But people noticed I'd been the one to warn her, that I'd chosen to help despite everything. My reputation, damaged by the original humiliation, began shifting. People started seeing me not as a pathetic rejected guy, but someone with genuine integrity who'd risen above his own pain to do right. I didn't chase their approval, but I won't pretend it didn't feel good being seen as more than a punchline. A few weeks later, sitting in the campus coffee shop working on an assignment, Janet sat down across from me unexpectedly. I reminded her we'd agreed. We were done. She smiled sadly, explaining she needed to see me once more, to properly thank me and say goodbye. She acknowledged owing me nothing changed, that she destroyed whatever we'd had, but needed me to know I'd change her life, not just by warning her about Michael, but by showing her what real kindness looked like. I hadn't needed to help her. No one would have blamed me for letting her get hurt, but I had anyway, and that had taught her something important, that she wanted to become someone who stood up for what was right, even when difficult, someone who hadn't forgotten herself the way she had. I told her quietly I wasn't some hero, just someone who'd gotten tired of being hurt and decided to act. She shook her head, insisting I was more than that, hoping I'd forgive her eventually. Not for her sake, but mine, since holding on to anger would only hurt me in the end. I told her maybe someday, but not today. She nodded, accepting that, then pulled a small envelope from her bag, placed it on the table, explaining she was transferring schools, starting fresh somewhere new, away from her parents and everything here, but wanted me to have this first. She told me to read it when ready, thanked me for everything, and walked away. I watched her leave without feeling anger or resentment for the first time, just closure. That night, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in her familiar handwriting, explaining she didn't expect forgiveness. Didn't even expect her to read it, but needed to write it regardless. She called me the best thing that had ever happened to her, admitted she'd been too blind and weak to recognize it, that fear had controlled her and cost her the one person who truly cared. She doubted she'd find someone like me again, doubted she deserved to, but promised to spend her life trying to become someone who did. Brave, principled, kind. She hoped I'd find happiness, find someone who valued me properly, and that someday thinking of her wouldn't bring pain, only the knowledge that she'd become better because of me. I set the letter down, watching the sunset cast long shadows across campus, thinking through everything that had happened. The pain, the anger, the growth. I realized I'd won, not through revenge, not through her suffering, but because I'd become exactly the person I wanted to be. I'd faced humiliation and used it to build something better instead of letting it destroy me. I'd taken control of my life, my future, my happiness, and no one could take that from me. As for Janet, I hoped she meant every word, hoped she found her way to becoming who she wanted to be. But that journey was hers now, not mine. I'd spent enough time living in the shadow of what we might have been. It was time to move forward. A few months later, I graduated with top honors, received multiple offers from prestigious companies, and built a life I was genuinely proud of, surrounded by people who respected me. And every now and then, thinking back to that humiliating night at the farewell party, I no longer felt pain, I felt gratitude. Because that terrible moment had set me on the path toward becoming exactly who I was meant to be. Janet had rejected me publicly, but in doing so, she'd given me the greatest gift possible. The motivation to become someone who never again needed her or anyone else, to define his worth. And that, in the end, was the ultimate victory.